An incredible relief showing what appears to be supernatural or mythical figures. A wondrous individual that appears to be some sort of giant compared to the others. Nothing so extraordinary about it if we were looking at a relief in Rome or somewhere in Europe. But once again, we're not in Rome. This particular relief is on a courthouse in Sioux City, Iowa. Join me today as we explore the legend, the myth, and the possible reality of giants. We've looked at numerous courthouses across the land, and we've seen rather extraordinary constructions with explicit and incredible detail, showing an ornate opulence that seems to be beyond the capacity and the capability of the fledgling United States, this being the Woodbury County Courthouse in Sioux City, Iowa. And we even have an incredible eagle on it, although I suppose some will see a phoenix, although I know people see phoenixes with wings anytime they see wings. And here we see a relief for a monument that would be more akin to our expectations. Here we have law enforcement, firefighters, first responders, and yet it's nothing like the figures that we see on the county courthouse. Was it really that different in World War I? If this was constructed in World War I, why do we not see something commemorating the Civil War, or the War of the Rebellion as they called it at that time? Instead, we see very incredible and amazing reliefs. And on the nearby Sioux City City Hall, we see another one of these remarkable structures. This being from the 1800s, of course. And how exactly did they construct something like this? Could someone construct something like this today? And you're probably asking, what do these structures actually have to do with giants? Well, perhaps nothing. But what do these structures have to do with Iowa? Why do we always see unique structures like this, with symbols that don't seem to conform with any of the national or state symbols that we'd expect to see from the United States and the Midwest in the 1890s to the 1920s? We come across this phenomenon frequently, and many just simply dismiss it. Well, what sort of symbols would you expect to see? In nearby Sioux Falls, in the southeast corner of South Dakota, we have the remains of the actual falls themselves near Queen Bee Mill, or at least the remnants of Queen Bee Mill. What a term for it. And yet what we appear to have here is some sort of massive foundation. Or unless you want to accept the fact that these are just natural formations, and some people will say that everything is natural. Some people might even argue that this structure over here is natural, this old power plant. Again, made out of some very impressive stones. What exactly are we looking at here on this particular site? Is this really the wreckage of a mill, or is it the remnants of something else? Perhaps something far more grand in scope and scale than we can begin to imagine. If this was an old construction site, or perhaps not that old after all, is it possible that the beings that were behind this construction site had enhanced capabilities? Now, we're not going to jump to conclusions just yet in terms of what these beings actually were. Were they just humans like us who just worked really hard, as the official historical account tells us? Or is there some sort of explanation behind it? Were they humans with a more advanced knowledge of construction techniques and possessed a greater technology? And yet the other, more exotic explanation, or theory, is that these were beings that had greater physical capabilities. Could it have been because they had a completely different stature than the stature that we presently possess? Here we see the actual remains of the Queen Bee Mill itself, and yet when you look at pictures of the mill when it actually existed, they don't seem to really conform to these remains. And naturally, you really can't access them because it's not safe. But of course, it is safe to go prancing around on the falls. I don't know, I don't make the rules, I just find it very, very interesting. I'm certainly not questioning them, just looking at the site. What do you see when you look at this? Is there anything about this that really makes a lot of sense? Keep it in mind that this incredible facility was constructed in the official historical account when this area was very sparsely populated by those that actually constructed it. There's even a story that a loan was taken out to build this impressive facility, this mill, and that it was only in operation for 2 years. And then once again, in Sioux Falls, in the nearby area, we have another one of these very impressive and opulent churches. This being the wondrous church that was designed by the same individual that constructed the Cathedral of St. Paul. And why is it we always have these incredible cathedrals? Once again, this is the construction techniques of the 19 teens. It's an incredibly large church. In World War I, in the middle of the Midwest and the Great Plains, structures like this were being built. Numerous structures at the same time. Do we even build a single structure like this across the entire region of the Midwest of the United States? There are some that will argue that there are structures that compare to these older structures that can be built today, but they're very, very hard to come by. And in my humble estimation, there really is no comparison. So what's the explanation behind this? Is it a lost capability? Is it really to be covered by the fact that we just worked harder in the distant past? Or is there another explanation behind it entirely? A different capability that we possessed. And no matter what your perspective is, that's what you have to say. Unless, of course, you're accepting the fact that somehow we had more financial capability, and that's simply what answers the question behind these structures. What's really going on here in the Sioux Falls and Sioux City area within the entryway to the Great Plains? You'll find many incredible mysteries when you explore. And what's really the background behind giant beings, myths, legends, or realities? We have no shortage of folklore that give us stories about giants. Now, the official explanation behind giants and why they appear in humanity's folklore, and of course when we say folklore, we're talking everything from biblical accounts to explanations for why certain areas are forested. Paul Bunyan, for example. But whether we're looking at the account of David versus Goliath or any other number of historical accounts, they are filled with stories, legends, and myths of giants. And that historical explanation will tell us it's just because people in the past found the fossilized remnants of megafauna, and that's how we explain this. Giant animals whose remains were mistaken for giant human beings. Yes, once again, our explanation is the fact that our ancestors they weren't exactly the most insightful of people. Yet, of course, the official historical account also tells us that our ancestors that weren't so insightful were the same ones who constructed these very impressive structures that still exist to this day. For example, these two figures being present in Italy, where you'll find no shortage of impressive structures. And Gog Magog. We've explored the concept of Gog Magog before, but apparently this is a giant in London in the United Kingdom. How impressive. But it's all just a myth. It's all just folklore. It's merely a means to explain the presence of all these incredible giants and beings that we have, as we understand it. But whether it's King Arthur or a group of knights, we always have these stories of individuals struggling against giants. Now, do these giants, if they did exist, represent some other form of being entirely? Or do they represent something else in our minds? Could it be possible that these giants were in fact a different variety of humans if they did exist? Now recall that the official account will tell us that no, it's impossible for giants to have existed. It's physically impossible. It's of course not physically impossible for megafauna to have existed, or giant animals in the past. I mean, we have elephants, we have mastodons, we have blue whales, and if you accept the scientific account of how life evolved, there were once great larger life forms. But yet we still have these stories within our folklore of these incredible beings that were colossal in size. And even here in London, how intriguing, we use the same modern marking method that they use in Iowa in the United States on these impressive structures. Just gluing what appears to be figures to mark a structure. How incredible. We recall the myth of the Seti-Ka for the Native Americans, the red-headed giants that once existed in the state of Nevada presently. But again, is this just all a giant coincidence? Are these all just tales and folklores from many different cultures, various different peoples that spoke different languages, and yet in their minds they all just happened to imagine giants? And of course, the explanation is because they found fossilized remnants, and therefore they thought it was giant human beings. And of course, when you have other strange things occurring in the historical account, such as the Cardiff Giant, you could understand why people would become confused. But the Cardiff Giant was merely just a hoax, was it not? Yet other significant belief systems that tell us that we've been around far longer than we realize indicate that in earlier eras, humans were much larger. Of course, this is just a belief, but there's other myths that seem to corroborate this belief system, such as the existence of the Cyclops in the Greek and the Roman myths. Yes, I'm reminded of the Cyclops, one of my favorite characters, Rel, in the film Kroll. And keep in mind that Rel in the film Kroll was also depicted as a bit of a giant. You also have the Cyclopean walls, constructed somehow in the distant past, no doubt by human beings that were of our size, at least according to the official account, and they just simply used a system of pulleys and other apparatuses that we don't exactly understand, although we have theories, and by theories I mean drawings, on how these structures were constructed. Of course, I'll admit I would take those theories perhaps a little bit more seriously if someone was able to actually conduct a bit of a working model of this, although that has yet to happen to my knowledge of someone making a working model of this system of pulleys that was used to construct, say, this incredible temple in Baalbek, Lebanon today, where we have some of the largest, although it should be noted not the largest, quarried stones. How exactly would one go about moving something like this? Over 1,000 tons. What method of pulleys and systems would be used? And looking at earlier paintings of Baalbek, we have to wonder what details of this particular site were lost over time. Now, can we come to the conclusion that these were constructed by giants? No, not necessarily. It could be possible it is some advanced technology or even some technique that we don't understand or we're not aware of. And what exactly were giants if they did exist? Were they other forms of humans? Were they fallen angels, as some would suggest? All possibilities are on the table. We can't really discount anything. Although I'll admit the account of the Nephilim, I always found the clown account rather humorous. Although it can't be discounted either. It's just intriguing. And then in other mythological and folklore tales, we have things such as the great trolls. Although in this particular depiction, these trolls look more like mystics from the film Dark Crystal. But the point being is that these accounts are out there, these different stories, and you can still go to these incredible quarry sites, such as this one in China, and come across these very, very large stones and these, I don't even know how to describe it, sites that just don't seem to add up with the limitations of technology. Even with modern technology available today, how would one go about moving a block of this size? Now, yes, we refer to these as megaliths to this day, but they do really exist. So why would anybody go through the trouble of carving or cutting these? And you certainly can't dismiss anything like this as just something that is merely the product of our mind. Here in Red Lake, Minnesota, there's a folklore tale that this was caused by Paul Bunyan falling on his backside after he was knocked down in a hand-to-hand fight. Yes, Paul Bunyan. So what's really the account behind giants? Do they actually exist? Are they a myth? Are they a legend? But is it all just something that we see in our minds? Is it just the way we try to explain things that we've lost the ability to do over time? Now, whether you want to attribute that to a lost civilization or just the fact that perhaps we've forgotten a lot more in our minds and our history than we realize, that's up to you. The Batala Monastery in Portugal, constructed 1386 to 1517, circa. Now we've looked at numerous structures such as this, cathedrals, basilicas, basilica cathedrals, and so on and so forth. But there's something truly extraordinary, remarkable about this monastery, this convent that exists in central Portugal to this day. There's something about this that almost screams more advanced technology to any of us. And it also has, once again, this example of colossal construction. Yes, it only took them, according to the official account, just over a century to construct this very impressive and extraordinary edifice that still stands to this day. I'll admit I'm surprised it didn't take several centuries, as we have for the account of several cathedrals in places such as Germany. How exactly did they go about doing this? Now, the official historical account tells us that there were numerous architects involved and they employed various styles, and that's how we explain the uniqueness of this structure. That the structure was more than just a monastery, that it was a monument, of course, to the King and Queen of Portugal. And yes, it's true that their actual burial site is within this site. But I want to ask you something. Do you really think that we'll have any world leaders or individuals of power and prominence today that would ever be able to construct such an incredible tomb as this? And if you ever go to Portugal and visit this in person, I ask you to try to explain, try to reconcile the constructions, the details that we have all within this one particular monastery. Really think about what history says was happening at the end of the 1300s and all the way through the 1400s when this incredible and otherworldly structure was being constructed. And it's this structure that we actually have some of the most dramatic images of the size of what they call the portals. Why exactly do they call these giant entryways portals? Well, there'll be a variety of explanations behind it. There'll be a variety of assessments for why we have these incredibly large doorways. By the way, it's also stated that this impressive and otherworldly monastery was not completed. Yes, when you look at something like this, they go to the trouble of telling us it was not completed. Well, maybe it wasn't. Central Portugal is such an intriguing area, where there's a lot of, how shall we say, structural anomalies within the landscape. And if you have the means, or if you actually are in the area, I strongly suggest you visit it, because you'll find a lot of things that seem to defy simple explanation. You'll see the remnants of what we're informed is the great Roman civilization that have somehow endured over time. Now, are these the genuine remnants, or have they been renovated? Have they been modified over time? That's always a question we have to ask. And yes, we understand why something would need to be renovated. It's quote-unquote preserving our history. Yes. We always come across that pattern, don't we? That pattern shows up in all sorts of places. Portugal, Des Moines, Iowa, and yes, even in Baalbek in Lebanon. How fascinating. But what exactly is the function of many of these unique and extraordinary structures within this very elaborately constructed building? Imagine someone building something like this today with this sort of construction material and this sort of effort. And once again, I want to ask you that question, could it be done? Utilizing all the modern means that we have to this day, and utilizing our wondrous ability for our evolved economic system that we have here in the 21st century, could anyone construct a structure like this in this manner today? And of course, this monastery, this convent, has these incredible figures that seem to show elements of terror. Now, once again, we have an official explanation, and that's because these apparitions of terror were designed to frighten away evil spirits from the structure. Or were they serving as some sort of strange warning for what was really going on? It's also impressive that this structure, being completed for over 500 years, is still holding up as well as it is. Yes, there are some areas that you see of what appears to be discoloration, but it always leads to that question, how old is it really? What sort of forces was it subjected to? What do we have here? Some sort of form of griffin? Well, of course, if you see wings, there are some that'll say that it must be a phoenix, of course. But whatever these images and these figures are actually showing us, once again, they don't seem to conform with what we'd expect to be the icons from the particular belief system. And then going back to the concept of the portals, as they refer to all these great doors on this elaborate structure. Why are they referred to as portals? Is it possible that that's exactly what they really were? That they weren't just simply doorways to physically pass through, but perhaps what we're looking at here is some sort of incredible and advanced piece of technology. That this entire structure itself is a technological apparatus that perhaps the way we see it is that it connects us to the spiritual world. Or maybe in the distant past, it really did connect to other worlds, other realities. And that's why we have these explanations of anomalies within our own historical account. trying to reconcile the official historical account with the existence of a building like this. And no, this is no AI-generated artwork. This is not something from someone's imagination. This is a real structure that you can go visit and interface with today. Ah, yes. Very interesting, an 8-pointed star. We sure see that a lot, don't we? And many other 8-pointed stars within the 8-pointed star. What exactly does this represent in this monastery? And why is it so prominently featured in such a centralized area? If you go and visit it in person, you'll see all sorts of things like this, and perhaps you can accept the official historical account that, yes, it merely required a lot of labor and a lot of effort, and yet from the late 1300s through the 1400s, before the discovery of the New World, mind you, that they were really able to build a structure like this. I mean, could anybody build a structure like this? If all the nations of the land agreed to work together and combine their resources, could someone build a structure like this today? Because truly it's otherworldly. It's ornate in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. Was this carved through painstaking effort across all these decades? If it was carved and it was all just using human labor explicitly, perhaps with the assistance of animals, how exactly was it done to such a detailed extent that we see? And when you really go around this structure and you really appreciate the gargantuan size of it, now you're probably asking, am I suggesting that this structure was constructed by giants? Well, you could certainly see why that would be in some people's minds and why that would be in someone's theoretical proposals for how something like this was actually achieved. But maybe it was just simply built by those that did possess a greater technology, construction techniques that have been lost over time. Now, even people who support the mainstream concept of history, they do agree that there are lost capabilities. Although usually it's a hand-wave explanation of the fact that there were craftsmen walking around everywhere, and you don't even need to bother addressing the logistics question because apparently blocks like this are already on site, and you just simply need to build some A-frames and you can pretty much do anything with enough time and effort. And maybe that explanation is good enough for you, and let me know if you think it is in the comments, because I want to know your thoughts. How exactly, though, does someone explain the presence of a structure like this? These structures with these colossal doors that we call portals, with ornate decorations all around them, and yet larger doorways. Was this so larger beings could pass through them, or was it just simply to really show the great glory of the construction capability? Because remember, you certainly don't see anyone building structures like this with these giant portals today. These portals that you could fit entire armies of people, sized as they are presently. What's the explanation behind the ornate detail with this? And why is it that we don't do this today? Why have we not continued to advance to where we really could build entire cities of vast structures like this? Structures that would really last for 500 years. Would it not be more cost effective? But we know our reality. Our structures that we build today tend to last in a shorter period of time. And the explanation is that's simply the end result of capitalism and turning a profit. We're not looking to build things that last. We're just looking to build things as cheaply as we possibly can to maximize our profit. Although I find it interesting that no matter what economic system or government we practice, this tends to be the end result. But perhaps it's just a coincidence. What are your thoughts on these explanations of the possible existence of giants? And if you believe in giants, then why do you believe that giants once existed? I'd like to know what you think in the comments. And if you don't, then what do you think is the purpose and the presence behind these structures? Reports of creatures and extraordinary phenomenon have been with us for quite some time. But imagine if you had some sort of creature that was incredibly terrifying and something that relegated a town to fear in levels not ever seen before. That's what we had with the account of the Van Meter Visitor in Van Meter, Iowa. A relatively small town whose population has never really exceeded 1,000 depending on what figures that we look at. A mining town just west of the great capital city of Iowa, Des Moines. Although many may not share that sentiment, we certainly do on this channel given our recent explorations. And our story occurred in 1903. Once again, a very questionable time in this small and quiet mining town in central Iowa, where a very disturbing creature was seen, encountered by the population. The belief was that this creature was released from the mine. A winged monster, creature emitting a dazzling light, terrifies hawkeyes, the term for Iowans then. Des Moines, Iowa, October 10th, the town of Van Meter, saying to be 1,000 people, terribly wrought by a horrible monster. A monster in its appearance Monday night. An implement dealer drove into town and saw it. His story was not believed. Another individual, a doctor, grabbed a shotgun and ran outside the building where he saw the monster. It had great bat-like wings and a dazzling light that fairly blinded him. These details definitely allude to a creature of a terrifying reality. Another account from a cashier of the only bank in town, and fearing bank robbers and repeating shotgun with shells and prepared to fend it off. Eventually recovered his senses. The night Dr. O.W. White saw the monster climbing down a telephone pole, using a beak, much in the manner of a parrot. But the climax came last night. The whole town was aroused by this time. Professor Martin, principal of the schools, decided upon description that it was some sort of antediluvian animal. Really? Multiple conflicting accounts in these newspaper and media outlets. But what exactly was this creature? This creature that would eventually be dubbed the Van Meter Visitor. A very strange and questionable time in 1903. What exactly was going on in the land at that time? Well, if we trust our official history, it was the Progressive era, and pretty much everything in the media was to be trusted. But what actually happened in this small town of Van Meter, Iowa? There are other accounts that indicate there was more than one creature that was seen. And yet, all the sources seem to indicate that the people in the town believe that the creatures were released from the nearby mine. Is this in fact what happened? And why do we have such a unique description for this incredible creature, this Van Meter Visitor? What exactly was it? Was it some kind of lost animal from an antediluvian era, as the principal of the school had suggested? Or was it something else? Something that today we might label as an extraterrestrial, or some other elaborate description. However, it does seem as though there are many media outlets and many locals at the time that did corroborate the existence and the numerous sightings of this terrifying creature in Van Meter, Iowa. Its sightings were relatively limited though, but when it was seen, it did terrorize the town. And we think of all the other accounts that we have across the land, such as the Mothman terrifying West Virginia. The Van Meter Visitor was relatively confined though, just to the town of Van Meter, Iowa. And the fact that the townspeople believed that it was connected to the opening of the mine. So it brings about the question, what exactly was the mine? Was it just simply a mine to bring about ore or coal or whatever else they were working the mine for? Or could it be that the mine was actually some sort of gateway, some sort of connection? Perhaps it could have even been a parallel reality gateway for all we know. Many different theories abound, and yet there were never any explanations for what the true reality of the so-called Van Meter Visitor. And what was it over time? Was it some kind of elaborate creature that today we may call, and perhaps erroneously, a cryptid? Or did it have some other identity? Was it some remnant, perhaps, of an exotic life form from a previous era in our lands, or what we associate with civilizations? Could it have even been something from a zoo in a previous era, for all we know, that was tampered with and freed from its trapped area as a result of the mining? The Van Meter Visitor, as it was called, a unique creature and something that I suppose you could describe as a combination between a pterodactyl with some sort of strange light emitting from the top of its head. It's almost as though it possesses both physical and almost supernatural characteristics, something that we could not easily explain with our current understanding of science and what is capable. It's rather interesting, though, how we have so many stories from this particular time frame. These stories of what seem to be driven by myth and superstition. Yet keep in mind, this was also a time of a people that, according to official history, were capable of building one of the most magnificent state capitals and achieved that feat only 15 short years, roughly, before this event occurred, right next door in Des Moines, Iowa. So what do you think this Van Meter visitor really was or is? Or do you just simply believe that this was merely an explanation by a mining town? An isolated mining town that was simply bedeviled by some unknown phenomenon, and the townspeople simply sought explanations for it. However, it is interesting to note that there are multiple witnesses, and witnesses that we'd consider of a credible profession, whether it be a cashier at a bank or a doctor, who informed us of actual sightings of this terrifying and borderline supernatural creature. But another possibility I want to suggest is, what if this creature is from a completely different realm? Not just a different time in terms of civilization, but what if this mine was actually some sort of portal? Or it was some sort of connection to lost technology from the previous civilization that would open a portal? We've certainly come across the theory many times in our explorations, whether we're looking at trying to explain the great cathedrals or other incredible structures as some sort of elaborate apparatus. What if this mine was in fact not a mine, but actually an area, an access point, if you will, to part of the older civilization that was buried, that still had functional technology? Maybe just simply the presence of the miners, as they were attempting to salvage what they could, had activated this portal, and therefore we had the sudden appearance of what would be described by the locals as a terrifying creature, with various almost supernatural capabilities. We certainly don't hear of many cryptids that have some sort of strange glow coming out of the top of their head. We do have other reports, though, of interesting things happening in mining towns, and Van Meter, Iowa was no different. Whatever really happened back then, it is safe to say, though, that it had a profound effect on the psychology of the subsequent settlers in Iowa. The Van Meter visitor was never forgotten. But we never actually got an explanation for what that figure was that was prancing around town after efforts in mining seems to have released this creature. There are different depictions for what it may have looked like, and there are different descriptions of the encounter. And how were these encounters finally stopped? Was this creature ever cornered and destroyed? The answer is no. The locals decided on their own recognizance that they were simply going to seal the mine. And by sealing the mine, they ended the encounters of the creature. And that's what the official history says happened. Now, of course, the official history also says that clearly that this is impossible. There were no encounters with any sort of strange creature in Van Meter. It was merely the superstitions and fears of the townspeople. Although investigations and other attempts to determine exactly what happened continued to this very day. There's even some depictions that give the Van Meter visitor more of a bird-like appearance, not like the pterodactyl appearance that we have with the glowing light out of the top of the head, but something that might, dare I say, resemble the plague doctor. Yes, once again, a bird-like creature resembling the plague doctor that we've explored in other explorations concerning the others. Why does that kind of figure always appear? Is it possible that there is some sort of species of non-human creatures that are bird-like in appearance and instead possess some sort of insidious intelligence? Were these creatures in fact possessing of a higher order intelligence? Could they actually speak amongst themselves? How many were there that were released from this particular mine? Again, assuming that the story did happen as it was initially relayed. It brings about many different mysteries, and the fact is that the Van Meter visitor has never disappeared from the folklore of Iowa. Very intriguing given the fact that Van Meter, with each passing year, comes closer and closer to the ever-expanding western limit of the Des Moines metro area. But the town has not forgotten of its encounter with the terrifying creature, whatever in fact it really was. Or creatures, because we don't exactly know how many were encountered. There's some accounts that say there were 2, others say that there were more. Was it some sort of creature from another realm that could perhaps be seen as evil? Was it some strange life form? Was it just a random monster that was lost? Or was it some sort of exotic animal from a bygone era? Or perhaps the most disturbing possibility, it was actually some advanced life form that does have a connection with the frequent and recurring theme that we see of the plague doctor bird creature. Whatever the situation may be, there are numerous publications of the Van Meter visitor. Official media ended up concluding, is it a robber? Is it a joker? The report was greatly exaggerated because remember, we have the understanding that media was very credible at this point in time. Remember, this was the Progressive Era. And the town of Van Meter in Iowa, to this very day, continues to have their commemoration of their encounter with the Van Meter visitor back in 1903, the wondrous and incredible Van Meter Visitor Festival, which occurs annually. And you're certainly welcome to attend any of them. But the story didn't end there. In nearby Boone County, north of Van Meter, there was an encounter 2 years ago with some strange, non-human creature referred to as a crawler. Now granted, these were limited first-hand accounts and may have simply been exaggerated, but it is intriguing that there is a connection with the so-called Van Meter visitor. Just going north of Van Meter, one eventually encounters the Ledges in the Des Moines River Valley, not too far from the town of Boone, Iowa. A very unique and incredible natural area, and not something that we tend to associate with our usual views of Iowa, with the vast expanses of cornfield. Rather, some very interesting natural rock formations and some very unique slot canyons leading right up into the Des Moines River Valley, and as part of the River Valley. There's also a well-documented and extensive presence from our friends in the former Civilian Conservation Corps. Yes, once again, during the Great Depression, they were out here in this beautiful natural area, building bridges and other structures because nobody needed housing during the Great Depression, but people needed to be put to work because they certainly needed to respect the concept of work and making sure that people had jobs. Don't forget that the Civilian Conservation Corps also had a secondary purpose of, how should we say, preparing the American population at that time for the coming war. And here you can see one of the bridges that was ostensibly built by the Civilian Conservation Corps during their unique efforts in the Ledges in Iowa. But what's the connection that we have here? Yet another old world site that's not too far from Van Meter, Iowa, that does contain some interesting remnants and once again the presence of the Civilian Conservation Corps. It's also unique that there was this sighting of this rather creepy humanoid or non-humanoid crawler in nearby Boone County. Now, officially, this sighting did not occur in the Ledges State Park. It occurred at McCoe's Park, but again, not very far from this particular area. So once again, we have these unique encounters with these unique creatures. Are they all just simply in the imagination of people, and they're simply looking for attention? Or is it an actual series of sightings? Is there even a connection from the earlier Van Meter visitor? There's also this rather strange and unique tomb that just happens to be in Boone County between the towns of Boone and Ames in a very isolated area. Now, officially, this was a monument that was built to a father who lost his daughter. But there's numerous other explanations, and there's numerous other theories for what's actually going on here. It is a very unique area, and the recent sighting of this rather strange and creepy crawling humanoid seems to have a connection with the Van Meter visitor. Of course, you'll be told that there is no actual remnants of monsters in Iowa to this day. Now let's move on and take a look at the Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds from Native American mythology. Apparently gigantic birds that possess supernatural powers and are derived from numerous Native American legends. There have also been numerous reports of encounters with these Thunderbirds. Very, very large birds, and there are numerous pictures. Now, the authenticity and the veracity of the pictures, of course, is always up for question, much as the stories that we had of the Van Meter visitor. Was it just simply local journalists that were simply exaggerating an account of an encounter with some sort of monster or some sort of strange creature? Is it the same thing with the reports and the sightings of this large thunderbird? Now, it's interesting to note that there have been reported sightings of this thunderbird across the United States at various locations, ranging from Wisconsin to the Rust Belt in Pennsylvania and numerous other areas, where people have reported seeing a very large bird that could even carry off people. Now, is it some sort of supernatural creature, or is it possibly a remnant or another species of bird? It becomes hard to say. Although there are reports and accounts of this thunderbird appearing in numerous locations. There is even an account of a couple pilots in Arizona in a small Cessna in the distant past who indicate that they came face to face with a thunderbird, that it nearly crashed into their plane and caused a terrifying aviation event. What would you think if you were flying along or driving along and you saw a creature such as this? Again, is this just simply the imagination of people gone wild? How large can birds really become? What is the largest bird that one could see in the land today? Well, when you really take that into consideration, then suddenly the presence and the possibility of these thunderbirds becomes something a lot more terrifyingly real, especially when we consider some of the great condors that can be seen in South America and their size when compared to human beings. Now, these are not any kind of imagined creatures, but these condors are very real creatures that still exist to this day and have a tremendous size to them. And of course, you've certainly seen numerous bald eagles and how large they can be and how large golden eagles can be. So, with avians of this particular size, with birds that reach this incredible size, then why does the concept of a thunderbird seem so far-fetched? Oftentimes, the personal descriptions indicate something that's relatively close to the size of one of these incredibly sized birds. Looking again at the Andean condors. Quite an incredible animal. But what if there is some other sort of creature that still exists out there? Perhaps an even larger bird that was seen, especially more in the past. Perhaps a bird that did exist. Now it comes down to the question, it is a very reasonable question. If there was ever such a large bird, one that was much larger than the condor pictured here, then why wasn't one ever killed or found or captured or seen and more well documented? Well, it could simply be that all that was seen were large birds that actually existed at the time, and they were mistaken for the thunderbird. Or could it also be possible that, much with the same theory that we have with the Van Meter visitor, that perhaps these incredible thunderbirds represent another type of creature, that were either survivors from a previous era, or perhaps they had access through some sort of portal to our realm from another realm. The fact that they're spoken about extensively by Native Americans makes it even more interesting. And once again, we have that supernatural element or that connection, that these thunderbirds are capable of many more feats than just simply being of large size and being able to carry off humans, that they actually have the powers of what some may consider magic. Or perhaps they are intelligent beings that have the ability to harness more advanced technology. There's all sorts of different possible explanations. But to simply dismiss the creature on its size, we have to go back to our sighting of the giant snake in the Congo by a Belgian helicopter pilot in 1959. Now, of course, we're assured by scientists and people who study animals that a snake of this size in this day and age is physically impossible, that the environment of the Congo in 1959 couldn't have supported it. There is a photo that's provided by the Belgian helicopter pilot, and it does show a very large-looking snake, although it is very difficult to determine the actual scale of the photo, and what the scale of the snake pictured here is in comparison to reality. There's been a lot of analysis done on this image, and it goes from either being inconclusive or being dismissed by scientists, and the fact that the environment, according to these scientists, could not possibly support a snake of this size. Now, original reports indicated that the snake was over 200 feet long. Refined reports indicate it was only about 50 feet long. Who's to know, who's to say? But officially, scientists tell us that there was once the Titanoboa. That was very large and well over 40 feet, depending, although how exactly they know since it's extinct, I'm not exactly sure, but that's what they assure us. So again, a conflicting account of what may have existed to what existed. Now let's move on and take a look at the Skinwalker. Officially, the Skinwalker in Navajo lore is an evil witch or sorcerer who can transform into animal forms, such as wolves or coyotes, and possesses the bodies of others to inflict sickness, death, and misfortune. Transformation requires profound spiritual degradation, often through the taboo act of killing a family member to gain control of dark magic and manipulate society. Skinwalkers are seen as a perversion of Navajo beliefs and traditions, embodying selfishness and chaos in contrast to the sacred values of their culture. Some of the key powers of the Skinwalker include shapeshifting, possession, dark magic, physical manifestation. Now, the origin of these beliefs of Skinwalkers is rather controversial. It seems to be something that was a warning in Navajo culture. Although one thing I've always found quite intriguing about Native American lore and myth is that it does seem to be a little bit more well connected with some of the possibilities that we've had, especially with the concepts going from whether it's the Wendigo, the Skinwalker, or the Thunderbird, to have a very intriguing understanding for the actual nature of these creatures, as though we're dealing with some sort of unique elemental force. And maybe what the Native Americans actually preserved was their understanding of how certain what we would call technologies, but what could also be called magic, worked in the very old world in the previous civilizations. That in retaining this knowledge they had an understanding. There was even an early 1990s miniseries film that's been forgotten called Shadowhunter starring Scott Glenn that featured a very direct and interesting portrayal, a depiction of what a Skinwalker would actually be like. And of course, everyone's no doubt heard about the numerous accounts and reports of the Skinwalker Ranch and the other encounters with Skinwalkers across the face of southwestern America. What's the true legacy, though, behind these Skinwalkers? Is it possible that this is more than just a corrupted individual? And isn't that interesting how, once again, we have the theme of corrupted human beings who are utilizing what we're informed is dark magic, or possibly dark technology. And the price for utilizing this dark technology or dark magic is the ultimate corruption of the individual themselves. Is that what we really see when we look at these Skinwalkers, when we consider their capabilities and the fact that their very existence and the nature of their existence is a contradiction to the values of the Navajo culture? No doubt it may have been a contradiction to the values of the entire Old World civilization, and perhaps the Navajo, for whatever reason, have retained more knowledge of that Old World culture. We also have the continuous legacy and legend of numerous lake monsters across the land. And it really doesn't matter where the lake may be, or the loch, as it is in Scotland, with the most famous example being the Loch Ness Monster, but also the numerous lakes in other lands, whether we're talking North America, South America, Asia. It seems as though every single lake that you come across has some sort of legend of some sort of terrifying monster. To even include Tahoe Tessie in Lake Tahoe on the border of California and Nevada. So what's the real story behind this? Why do we have these legends all stemming from what appears to be the Loch Ness Monster? Although was the Loch Ness Monster chronologically the first, or is it just the most well-known? Because whether you're on Lake Champlain or any of the Great Lakes, and yes, Lake Superior does have its own legend of a lake monster, which is not really that surprising given the presence of the Three Sisters or the terrifying rogue waves there. We look at the possible theories for what these lake monsters may be, some theories being posited that they're the remnants of dinosaurs. Of course, that's the mainstream theory, plesiosaurs, and so on and so forth. In fact, this is what's implied in the in the film Loch Ness starring Ted Danson. Although I will give this film a little bit of credit because it goes beyond the science. It's actually the faith of the characters in this particular film that enable them to actually discover these incredible creatures. And it implies that these creatures are much more than just simply some sort of remnant, although they may well be, of creatures from a distant past. Perhaps there's actually a lot more truth in that sentiment than we like to believe. But what do you think all of these lake creatures really are? Do you think they could be remnants of long extinct life forms? Or could it be on a much shorter time scale? That these particular life forms really did exist in a much more recent time than we like to think, that could have been documented and were well known by the civilization that truly preceded ours? Or is it just simply all a coincidence? There's no doubt that there's been numerous efforts to try to fabricate evidence, such as this image here of the Loch Ness Monster, which was admitted to have been a faked photograph, apparently. Although it was never exactly the best photograph, there are other photographs that seem to give clues that there may be something extraordinary out there. There's numerous accounts and reports and instances of contact with these creatures. And I always find it very interesting that someone would want to try to fabricate evidence. Well, they would do it for the purposes of being acknowledged by the public. And if that's the case, then why would anyone ever admit to doing such a thing? What is really happening within these lakes? And something else to remember with a lot of lakes is that we have the local legends that indicate that these lakes themselves often function as portals, gateways to other realms, means of accessing other realities. I don't know if that's the truth, but it is interesting that there's always these same legends, and they encounter the presence of these incredible creatures. Now, whether some of these creatures exist or not, or they're merely the product of our imagination, there are far too many reports to just simply ignore and dismiss. And once again, it's much like with all the old world structures that we do our explorations on. We have far too many details to just simply discard them all. As much as skeptics would like to hand wave everything away and just say that because there's no immediate evidence in this particular instance, then that means that all of these encounters must simply be the product of the imagination of the observer. And there's no doubt misidentifications. But there have been numerous examples of encounters with extraordinary creatures that have been well documented and are acknowledged by our official history. It's just intriguing how we tend to downplay these encounters. Imagine what the explorers thought when they first saw the incredibly sized condors that still exist to this day. Imagine what somebody would have thought when they first saw the incredibly large pythons and anacondas as they were exploring the jungles. Maybe, perhaps it is possible that there are areas where these incredible creatures do really exist. And this is why we have all these reports of these lake monsters. And the reason that they're just so elusive is because of the fact that they do exist in an area, a nexus point, an overlay of realities, where they're only visible for a brief period of time, or they're only, dare I say, physically present for a brief period of time. It is just a theory, and it can be easily dismissed, but in numerous images and all the accounts and stories, the folklore, the fact that we have all these legends associated with these lakes, wherever they are, and they're definitely all over the land, that indicate the possibility of a lake monster, then once again it does connect with our other stories that we have. And what other strange creatures of terror do we have? Whether we're looking at the legend of the Scorpion Man that may have existed. Was this some creature that was once very real? According to our legend, it comes from distant, ancient civilizations, whether you want to attribute it to the Babylonians, the Sumerians, or the Mayans. And there's certainly no shortage of legends from the Mayan civilization, which I've always found very intriguing because officially we don't have a direct connection with the Mayan civilization. It's all done through research. So what is really the truth behind all this? Because these extraordinary creatures, or terrifying creatures, depending on one's perspective, and there's no doubt that there are detailed descriptions of very terrifying creatures that certainly make some of the worst horror movies seem like G-rated Sunday picnics by comparison. But perhaps there's nothing more terrifying than the different types of human beings that may have been encountered. The whole concept of a human being possessing no eyes or completely black eyes is something that's disturbing. And it's also a very well-known horror trope that was used quite effectively in the past. The possibility of a human being with no eyes to see. And that would be the description. A human with no eyes whatsoever, lacking perhaps the soul or the ethereal energy that a real human may actually possess. Or perhaps a corrupted being of some sort. In the film Kroll from 1983, these were considered changelings, creatures that were not human, but were designed to look human, but would always give themselves away when their eyes would turn completely black, showing the lack of their humanity, used as forces of destruction. And now I thought we'd take a look at different legends from different states. We've looked at the Wendigo before, and while it is attributed to northern Minnesota, it's suffice to say that it's attributed to numerous northern states. There's lots of Wendigo sightings in Wisconsin, North Dakota, and all the way over to Washington. The water babies of Massacre Rocks in Idaho sit by the river, and you can hear the sounds of these babies crying. They're the babies that mothers were forced to kill during a famine rather than see them starve. Some say these babies evolved into tricky creatures with fins and gills. And looking at these urban legends, these are not always so well known. Some are. Dead Children's Playground, Huntsville, Alabama. During the late night hours, swings move by themselves as spirits of buried children come to play. Quite an interesting location in Huntsville, Alabama. And why is it that such a legend is there? What have we forgotten over time? The Dark Watchers in Santa Lucia Mountains, California. Featureless dark silhouettes, often with brimmed hats or walking sticks, stare down travelers during twilight and dawn in Santa Lucia Mountains. John Steinbeck briefly mentioned them in Flight. They should not be addressed or acknowledged. Slaughterhouse Canyon in Kingman, Arizona. One day a father failed to return to his cabin during the 1800s gold rush, and his family starved. The mother went insane, put on her wedding dress, and chopped her children up. Today you can still hear her cries for forgiveness. And I wonder if there is more of a connection with this. The Devil's Chair in Cassadaga, Florida. The Cassadaga Spiritualist Camp is full of odd ghosts, but one chair supposedly is a favorite for the Big Cheese himself. According to local lore, if you sit in it, he'll whisper horrible things in your ear, forever changing you, and if you leave a beer on his chair overnight, he'll drink it, sometimes even if it's still sealed. The Ghost Boy of Clinton Road in New Jersey. Hiding under one of the bridges of Clinton Road is a ghost boy. But don't worry, he's pretty nice and helpful. If you throw a coin into the river, he'll return it to you. So I guess it's sort of a wishing well where you get the coin flung back to you. Maybe that's where they got that scene in the Goonies from. Goody Cole in Hampton, New Hampshire. Eunice Goody Cole is blamed for numerous local tragedies and accused of witchcraft twice. Legend says the locals staked her heart to make sure she wouldn't bother them, but they continue to blame numerous events on her. Some say she still pays a visit from time to time. Annabelle the Demonic Doll. Yes, we've heard of this from the recent franchise. The Demonic Doll in The Conjuring and Annabelle is inspired by a real-life Raggedy Ann doll supposedly inhabited by the spirit of a dead girl, which was given to two demonologists, Ed and Lorraine Warren, after some extremely malicious paranormal activity. The Goat Man, Prince George's County, Maryland. This legend stirred so much enthusiasm that the United States Department of Agriculture at one point had to formally deny the creation of the Goat Man in their Beltsville Research Agricultural Center. The half-man, half-goat creature likes to chase down teenagers in Lover's Lane and distract drivers on Crybaby Bridge. How about that? Night Marchers, Hawaii. Deadly ghosts of ancient Hawaiian warriors that march on the waters during nights honoring ancient gods. The Night Marchers are heralded by chanting and conch shells. If you hear that, run and don't look back. The Villisca Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa. Based on real events, this 1912 cold case features a whole family, 2 parents, 4 children, and 2 house guests being bludgeoned to death in their sleep. Since then, the house has been the source of odd paranormal activity, such as a ghost hunter stabbing himself in the chest in 2014. Kushtaka, Southern Alaska. Shape-shifting creatures that are a cross between an otter and a man. The Kushtaka make noises that mimic children and wives to lure fishermen, though they are sometimes helpful tricksters. Ah yes, a conflicting account with these shape-shifting creatures. What else would we have? The Phantom Hitchhiker of Black Horse Lake, Cascade County, Montana. A Native American man with long black hair wearing an outdated baggy jacket and jeans collides with cars, suddenly appearing on their windshield, only for him to vanish without a dent. He's also been known to hitch a ride and chase cars at inhuman speeds. The Spiteful Mermaid of Pyramid Lake, Nevada. While Area 51 gets all the fame and glory for its supposed alien autopsies, fewer people know about the curse on Pyramid Lake, which happened after a Paiute man fell in love with a mermaid. His tribe rejected her and told him to throw her back in. She cursed the lake, brought the settlers, and ignited a war. Talk about spite. Riverdale Road in Thornton, Colorado. Riverdale Road is home to a host of legends. While traveling down the road during a full moon, one could see the hanging bodies of slaves on the trees. They have their own lady in white. But one section of road led to a mansion that contained a satanic cult. The gate to hell itself is reportedly inside a chicken coop. What else would it be? Colonel Buck's tomb in Bucksport, Maine. After a woman became pregnant with Colonel Buck's son, he forced her out to take care of the babe alone, later having her burned as a witch. The son ran off with the witch's leg that had rolled out of the bonfire, and he later cursed the colonel's tomb, which now bears the stain of a leg, despite several efforts and attempts to clean it. The cursed pillar in Augusta, Georgia. After a preacher was told he couldn't deliver a sermon next to the pillar, he declared that the whole town would be destroyed and the pillar would be the only thing left standing. A freak tornado later destroyed most of Augusta, with the pillar left standing. And I guess it didn't end up like other artifacts in Georgia. Ghost elephants in Forest Park, Illinois. A real-life 1918 train wreck, a circus of circus cars leading to troop deaths, has popularized the legend that elephants had to be buried where they fell. Now, supposedly, the circus takes place at night in Woodlawn Cemetery. And that's what you have from Illinois. Not too big of a surprise there. The Men in Black at Shaman's Portal in Beaver, Oklahoma. Beaver Dunes Park is the Bermuda Triangle of Oklahoma, with weird disappearances dating back as far as Coronado's time, when his men disappeared in flashes of green light. In recent times, archaeologists have been chased away from the site by mysterious government officials. According to superstition, anyone who learns anything about what's truly buried underneath the sand disappears. Walking Sam, Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. A 7-foot-tall specter whose job it is to collect the souls of suicide victims stalks lonely, depressed adolescents. Perhaps he's an explanation for the alarmingly high suicide rates in the area, or the few recent attempts at mass suicide. La Mala Hora, New Mexico. If you're traveling alone in country crossroads after dark, avoid this demon, which appears as a woman. She drives people insane, and if you see her, either you or someone you love will die. Yes, it suddenly gives a whole new meaning to going through those mountain passes in New Mexico, doesn't it? Skin Tom in Wallen, Tennessee. Don't woo the wrong lady like young Tom did. He ended up getting skinned alive by a beautiful woman's angry husband. His bloody ghost hangs around Lover's Lane to punish cheaters. Sounds like a very extreme moment. The Curse of Escalante Petrified Forest, Escalante, Utah. Anyone who takes petrified wood from the state park befalls bad luck. Job loss, sickness, and accidents. Park managers claim they get dozens of packages every year, sending back chunks of wood from regretful thieves. Mercy Brown the Vampire in Bucksport, Rhode Island. Outbreaks of tuberculosis caused a vampire scare in 1892 when a full family contracted the disease. While most of her family's bodies decomposed, Mercy's body seemed to be frozen in time, making people suspect her to be a vampire. While it was obviously superstition, the legend persisted. The Rugaro. A pale white werewolf-like creature prowls the swamps in Louisiana, and often stars in stories to encourage children to behave, such as hunting down Catholics who don't practice Lent. Well, I'll have to be sure I give up eating fish for Lent again. The Loveland Frog in Loveland, Ohio. A humanoid 4-foot frog apparently hangs out on the sides of roads in Loveland at night, and it will stand up on its hind legs, wave a wand over its head, and shoot sparks to deter humans. A frog that shoots sparks. Beware. Watch out for the one that shoots bees. The Gateway to Hell in Stull, Kansas. One of several gateways to hell in America. Yes, so many. The stairs in an old demolished church open to the other side on Halloween and the spring equinox. Terrifying beyond all measure. And moving on from Kansas, we go to Hopkinsville, Kentucky. We've explored the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter with the goblins, the creatures, the aliens, whatever we want to think of them as. And while most skeptics easily dismiss them as owls, there have been a new wave of recent sightings of them on the other side of Kentucky. Beware when you're in the Cumberland Gap. Cropsey, we've explored this before in Staten Island, New York. The escaped mental patient with a hook for a hand would snatch children in Staten Island, but the old legend became horrifyingly real when a killer named Andre Rand was caught in the 1970s. And you may recall the live stream exploration where we did that intriguing look at that individual. The Nain Rogue, Detroit, Michigan. Detroit is haunted by a small, impish hobgoblin who predicts misfortune and has cursed the city. He was seen in the 1805 fire, which nearly destroyed the whole city, the 1968 riots, and the 1976 ice storm. Today, a banishment parade is celebrated yearly. Radioactive hornets in Nebraska. This is a recent urban legend. After the Fukushima nuclear disaster, the locals of Nebraska believed that mutant hornets from that area had grown to 4 times their normal size and were running rampant locally. And it makes you wonder what else is going on in Nebraska when you have radioactive hornets. Charlie No Face, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Rumors of murderous faceless man roaming the streets at night were based on a real-life person who'd suffered an extreme accident that destroyed his face. He wasn't, as it turns out, a murderer. He walked at night because he wanted to get fresh air and be left alone. The legend stuck, however. The Candy Lady, Terrell, Texas. Candy left out on the windowsill is meant to lure out children so a spectral woman can pull out their teeth, kidnap them, or stab them in the eyes. The story may have been linked to a real person, Clara Crane, who killed her husband by poisoning Candy and was later released from an institution. Corpse Light in Delaware. There's no lighthouse in Cape Henlopen, but there is a phantom light. It crashed the ship Devonshire's on Christmas of 1665, when more than 200 men died. Allegedly, the light is a curse from a local Native American tribe after British soldiers slaughtered them. Boo Hags, Southern Coastal Region, South Carolina. Gula folklore tells us about evil souls who stay behind after death and become skinless, vampire-like witches who take other people's skin for a ride. Where have I heard that before? The White Things, West Virginia. Mothman might be the more popular mystery, but rural West Virginia is also home to mysterious dog-like creatures the size of a lion with white, shaggy fur. And so if you're in West Virginia, beware of the Mothman and beware of these terrifying dogs with white, shaggy fur. Zombie Road in Wildwood, Missouri. Stories about strange deaths along the road as far back as Native American times and drownings in the nearby river made it a fun haunted spot for teenagers for decades, but many of them have perished in strange accidents too. Today, dark shadows follow you, seen only out of the corner of your eye. Mercritus in Mississippi. This story is an odd myth. It's about a disease. Supposedly a horrible outbreak wrecked much of a rural Mississippi town and was later covered up by the government and medical community. If a man ingested too much lead, he would produce a smell that would cause a hormonal reaction in women who descend into mad homicidal fits. The Vampire Beast of Bladenboro, North Carolina. Gruesome deaths in the 1950s of mutilated livestock and dogs drained of blood led to reports of something vaguely feline and huge living near Bladenboro. The Platte River Ship, Platte River, Wyoming. Through thick mist, usually in February, a ship can be seen sailing the Platte River, its phantom crew frosted over. On the deck, you'll allegedly see the body of someone you know or yourself. Either way, the person's death will come soon. Brings a whole new meaning to being in Wyoming. The green-clawed beast in the Ohio River in Quitman, Indiana. With hairy arms, clawed hands, and green skin, this human-sized creature grabs unsuspecting women. Some believe the specific incident that inspired the legend was an extraterrestrial visit related to the Kentucky Goblin sightings, which happened on the same day. Yes, again, overlapping days. Caddy of Cadboro Bay in Washington. While the legendary Bigfoot gets a great deal of attention in this state, you might not have heard of Caddy, short for Cadborosaurus, the local sea monster hanging out in Cadboro Bay. So again, augmenting our lake creatures that we had earlier. Dog Boy, Quitman, Arkansas. A werewolf-like ghost walks on all fours and haunts his childhood home. This myth is based on the sad story of a real man, Gerald Bettis, who is rumored to experiment on stray animals and reportedly abused his elderly parents. Not exactly a touching story. Puckwudgies. Hockomock Swamp in Massachusetts. Tiny gray tricksters resembling humanoid porcupines will lure people off cliffs or trap them in sand in the swampy regions of Massachusetts. That doesn't sound like a critter that you'd want to come across. The Bunny Man, Clifton, Virginia. On Halloween many years ago, a bus of transferring asylum inmates crashed with one of the inmates escaping. For years, skinned, half-eaten rabbits were found hanging from the trees near Bunny Bridge, even after the supposed culprit died. Eventually, he allegedly attacked humans, too, bodies strung up over the bridge. The Rhinelander Hodag in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. An ugly, stumpy critter with a spiked tail. The Hodag features in Paul Bunyan's stories and reportedly likes to eat bulldogs. So don't take your bulldogs with you if you're going to Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Also on your way to visit the site of Little Bohemia. The Minniwashitu, Missouri River, North Dakota. The red bison-like water monster of the Missouri River travels upstream to break ice. Anyone who sees it alone in the daytime will go insane. I could certainly see why. The Bandaged Man, Cannon Beach, Oregon. The ghost of a logger who died in a grisly sawmill accident attacks cars and terrorizes teenagers. The smell of rotting flesh predicts a visit. And what about the smell of rotting fish with rotting flesh? Is that a definitive indicator of a visit? Deep frozen folks in Vermont. Frugal Vermonters facing extreme winters have been said to freeze their elderly and thaw them in the spring. Is this more scary or utilitarian or both? What exactly are your thoughts on it? Why would someone ever do something like this?
Sorcerer, but I'll gladly test your steel, old friend.
The presence of the others, non-human beings that we come across in our explorations. And what are these? We begin by looking at the Plague Doctor. Now, according to official history, the Plague Doctor was merely a response by the civilization, the societies of the so-called Middle Ages, to respond to the recurring occurrences of the bubonic plague, or the Black Death as they called it. The purpose behind the Plague Doctor was this was some individual who was not a fully trained doctor or was even considered a charlatan, who was contracted by the state to actually help people deal with the plague. Although, in reality, according to official historical accounts, they really didn't help anybody deal with anything. In fact, the only purpose they served with facilitating the government tracking the plague was designating who had actually contracted the plague and who had died from it. So again, another account of a previous government keeping track of who was alive and who was dead, and yet we still have questionable population counts. So, the Plague Doctor was not effective in responding to the plague. It should also be noted that the actual costume came a couple centuries after the original occurrence of the bubonic plague in the 1300s, or however you want to think of the official historical timeline. There's a very disturbing psychological effect with this character. And indeed, from official historical accounts at the time, we often have an almost inhuman appearance to it. And it's this recurring theme of the inhuman appearance that we have to question, is there something more behind this Plague Doctor? For example, we notice the details in the hands. Very inhuman hands that are often displayed with long nails or something that seems to be some sort of predatory creature. There's always the bird-like mask, and yet we can't ignore the fact that there's even a depiction from Native American lore that matches something that looks like the Plague Doctor. Is this merely a coincidence? Or is this also a profound psychological fear that endured in Native American mythology? To this day, we can see this individual that looks just like the Plague Doctor bird mask. very strange and frightening creature. And yet when we look closely, we see that it's displayed with the same bizarre inhuman hands, with the long claws. So what are we really looking at with this plague doctor? Is this really just some human being who wore a bird mask to have pleasant-smelling things within the mask to protect them from the plague? At least that's what the mainstream tells us. It's always interesting how we have these conflicting accounts in terms of the capability of the denizens of a particular time period. And yet the plague doctor is no exception. Simply have pleasant-smelling things, and it'll protect you from the plague, the terrifying scourge of the bubonic death that had completely overwhelmed Europe and returned in subsequent centuries. Again, that's what the mainstream historical account says. But we consider the psychological and profound terror that would accompany this mask. Why would any government or religious authority at that time, as we're informed Europe especially had, allow this or condone it? It's almost as though they were trying to terrify their population if this is indeed what happened. Or was this really representing something else? A creature that was not human. A creature that may have once been human but was transformed. Or perhaps some sort of other creature. Certainly not human at all from its inception. And when we compare and contrast the accounts we have of the plague doctors from Europe to some of the accounts of the Native American mythology, these are questions we have to ask, because these consistencies are a little too common to simply be ignored and dismissed as mere coincidence. When you look closer at the plague doctor, though, you start to understand the psychological effect it has, imagining what may actually be under that mask. What if it's not human at all? What if you're actually looking at some sort of terrifying bird or predatory creature? Something that you could even say resembles a Skeksis from the Dark Crystal franchise. And indeed, you have other images that give the display of the pointed teeth and the predatory tongue that's often displayed from what creatures might actually be under these plague doctor masks. And we have a completely different consideration, a completely different series of events that may have transpired, that these masks, these almost chemical protective suits, were actually concealing a very horrific and terrifying creature underneath it, that for some reason the civilizations at that time continued to remember it, and always the profound psychological effect. Because we have to ask, if the plague doctor was not some sort of terrifying creature, why would the authorities at the time actually have their doctors dress up with such a mentality to terrify the population? Unless in reality they were these creatures, and they were simply concealing themselves so they could operate within the population, to do whatever terrifying thing that they were going to do. And we have a good idea of what that was, because what persists with the rumors of these plague doctors or these terrifying creatures is they were indeed predatory. The population in its collective conscience remembers that death accompanied these creatures wherever they showed up. And it was not merely a coincidence. It's something that was remembered and recorded, and you can find no shortage of examples, not just in European historical accounts, but also in the mythologies of many Native American tribes at how terrifying and horrific these creatures really were. What sort of powers did they have? And why is it that they still endure in our memory to this day? The terrifying implications of seeing the appearance of whatever creature may have really existed under the costume of the plague doctor. And now we go to the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter. Oftentimes the whole aspect of aliens is dismissed as being absurd and ludicrous. And yet we have this account of the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins, not necessarily aliens, and this occurred in the town of Kelly, near Hopkinsville in Kentucky, not very far from Fort Campbell in Tennessee, a major U.S. Army base where the 101st Airborne Division is based. And in the encounter at the isolated Sutton farmhouse, we have an account of these terrifying little goblins that just showed up on this farmhouse. What's a little bit more interesting, though, about this account compared to the usual so-called alien contact accounts is that there seem to be elements of it that are more real. For example, there's no accounts of any missing time. We merely had this unfortunate family in this isolated farm in Kentucky that suddenly encountered these goblins, these creatures that were prowling about their farm. and this of course invokes the terror with this account. It should also be noted that local authorities, which did include members of the 101st Airborne Division, did arrive to respond to this incident after this family was terrified through a night by these goblins and tried to fend them off by using firearms. Naturally, the firearms were not effective against these horrific entities, these goblins, or these aliens, whatever you really want to think of them as. And yet the incident afterwards was well documented of the family being terrorized in their own house by these horrific goblins. Repeated attempts to fend them off with firearms were ineffective, and the goblins continued to terrorize the family within and in the exterior of their house and their farm. It should be noted that when the authorities arrived on the scene, they took this account very seriously, and they did notice that the family seemed to be in a state of utter terror and panic, as though they really had endured some sort of event that had challenged their psychological well-being. And one can certainly understand why the presence of ghoulish creatures that are impervious to firearms could inflict such terror on people that they would never forget it. And I think that's one of the elements of this particular account that gives it a little bit more credibility. Of course, we could easily dismiss this account as the product of fantastical imaginations, but the fact that the authorities did respond and did document that this family was psychologically traumatized gives it a little more credibility. It should also be noted that this encounter very nearly inspired a certain filmmaker to make a film about terrifying aliens. Of course, he changed it to more of a cute alien that we recall as E.T. The event was also documented in local media at the time. On this farm in Kelly, Kentucky, where the story of a spaceship and 12 little men showed up on the farm terrorizing the family, and that the firearms were indeed ineffective defending them off. What was really going on? What were these creatures? Were these aliens, as we might like to think, or were these some other extraterrestrial entities beyond which we understand? Or was this some sort of cryptid, some sort of undocumented animal that happened to be existing near this farm? Or was it simply the product of mass hallucination and everyone panicking had caused the family to go into this panic state because they thought they viewed something that was not really there? And when the authorities arrived, therefore they documented it as though it was an event where the family was psychologically traumatized, but it was merely the product of their own crazed imaginations. It should be noted, though, that there is a very profound psychological effect to intrusions within your own property, your own residence. So we could certainly understand why the profound psychological effect could inspire the imagination to hallucinate a little bit. But for whatever reason, there seems to be some more consistencies behind this. Although some would state that it's merely a desire of the state of Kentucky to simply bring about more tourism by pushing this particular area and having people come in to explore the lands that were involved in the great Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter. Yet, oddly enough, in subsequent events and investigations, there never seemed to be many inconsistencies with the accounts that were given, and no one in the family ever retracted their account as being official. Now, I'm sure if you look a little deeper, you might find potential retractions and changes, or the story going back and forth. But it is a very terrifying and almost realistic seeming story. What were these goblins, if they did in fact exist? Where did they come from? And what was their true intention? Based on the events that the family reported, they just seemed to be curious above all else. And it really was stating the word probing. Probing is a military procedure, or conducting reconnaissance, trying to learn about a particular area. And there might be a follow-on force that's going to follow probing. These are some of the sketches of the creatures, or the goblins, or the entities, or whatever you want to refer to them as, that were cataloged by one of the members of the 101st Airborne when they showed up to investigate this event. Some local authorities even suggested that perhaps the family had misidentified our good friend the owl as these horrific entities. Yes, indeed. And I've certainly encountered a lot of bulletproof owls in my life as well. They're beautiful animals, but somehow I don't believe that these were owls. Either this was some sort of massive psychological aberration for the family, or there was a little bit more to this account. There is a troubling and unsettling element of realism. The fact that this remains a quote-unquote well-documented account, and the fact that no one was ever able to dismiss or disprove this. The actual occurrence of creatures showing up in our home or our isolated residence is a recurring terror that we face. So, do these creatures represent something that are real? Do they have some other explanation? Let's look at the accounts that we have of cryptids, monsters, and demons. One of the most well-known that we have tends to be the Jersey Devil, operating in the Pine Barrens Forest in New Jersey. And there have been many different films and books that explore the account of the legend of the birth of this creature, involving elements of witchcraft and myth and several different origin stories, although there tend to be a few agreed upon. The Jersey Devil represents the classic cryptid, a very disgusting and horrific creature that exists in contravention of all known rules of life. And yet there have been several documented sightings of this creature, some images even being purported to be real. Although, of course, we know that with our ability to generate images, this doesn't necessarily prove anything. And again, this could be another example of some sort of psychological aberration. But what interests me is that we have so many different historical accounts, or things that are well documented, that allude to the existence of this terrifying creature, this Jersey Devil. There's also the really strange element of the psychological effects that seem to accompany this creature wherever it exists, or if it does in fact exist. Is this merely the product of the tales impacting the human mind, and suddenly it becomes yet another version of mass hysteria? Well, perhaps the thing we should be most concerned about then is how easily influenced the human mind can be, and perhaps how easily influenced the mind can be in large groups, if that's indeed what we're seeing here as the mainstream wants us to believe, that none of these creatures really exist, and that people are just simply susceptible to, how shall we say, suggestion. But oddly enough, there do seem to be more details behind certain cryptids and creatures such as the Jersey Devil, whether it's the description of its actual being, or some of its terrifying personal habits that it has. What does it hunt? And why does it have such an element of terror to it? Is it possible that such a creature could really exist? We've oftentimes dismissed the other creatures that we said could never exist, and yet we're often surprised at what our mainstream and official accounts tell us about what existed in the distant past, whether it's large creatures or terrifying creatures. This is what the Jersey Devil allegedly looks like, and this is its scale to an actual human. Now, is it true to some of the mythological accounts that the Jersey Devil was the product of some sort of witchcraft, some sort of spell, or maybe even some sort of dark alchemy, if you will? Some sort of experiment that we think about with the homunculus example that may have gone wrong and transformed either some sort of unfortunate creature or human being into something else. Once again, this will simply be dismissed as fantastical accounts or simply searching for possibilities when there are none. It should also be noted that one of the most interesting films made about the Jersey Devil was Exploring for the Jersey Devil, called The Last Broadcast. It set the stage for the found footage films, although this one is a little unique, and it did precede the more famous and well-known Blair Witch film. The other interesting element about this film is it talks about the profound psychological impact on certain individuals. And unlike the Blair Witch, we do actually find out who's behind the killings in this film. And we do find out where the real terror lies. It's within the human heart, or the human soul, or however you want to view it. And perhaps that's the real terror that we have. Other cryptids that we consider are the Mothman from West Virginia. And the Mothman has several different accounts behind it that seem to give it a little bit more realism than we might like to think. Accounts of something being in post-World War II munitions plants, a creature that was roving around there that terrorized several teens as they were driving in their car. There's even an account of a couple teens trying to escape this creature, driving at speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour, and the creature was easily keeping up as it flew. There's also the accounts of the Mothman that say that it would be a portent of doom. Of course, there's always signs and portents that seems to accompany these creatures, whether it's a bridge collapse or some other great calamity that occurs in a particular area. There's many myths that actually come about from Appalachia, where this Mothman was sighted, and many of these myths include other accounts of cryptids. Is there again something more to this, or once again is this a mass psychological aberration? Is this again some sort of creature that may have existed in the distant past, and yet some surviving examples of it, for whatever reason, continue to inhabit the wilderness that are not easily seen? Or again, is it just something that we could easily dismiss as some sort of psychological aberration? Our mainstream adherents will dismiss this as merely the product of pseudoscience, and indeed they try to categorize these sightings as the adherents of pseudoscience simply trying to push a meaning that these are aliens or some other strange cryptid creatures that have never been seen. What I find particularly interesting, though, is in this age of the internet and shared information, that we have such a variety of creatures that are seen all over the land. We don't have people reporting Mothman sightings all over every single continent. We have unique creatures that seem to be confined to unique regions. Now, once again, I'm sure that our mainstream skeptics or skeptoids will tell us that this is merely the product of localized mass hysteria. We also consider the account of the Wendigo, a Native American mythological terror. The Wendigo is quite fascinating because of the fact that it was a spirit, and yet there are diverging accounts that it was either some sort of horrific, monstrous creature, or a spirit that would possess a human being, causing it to engage in cannibalistic tendencies. Indeed, the terror behind these creatures is that they would actually feed exclusively on human flesh. And I've always given a little bit more variety and understanding, along with authenticity, to some of the Native American mythological accounts. They had to go through surviving a lot of factors of the reset to include the reservation in the American education system, and yet they managed to retain many of their myths and their legends, which do seem to have a little bit more in terms of legitimacy to them, especially given the fact that there are numerous Native Americans that will not speak of creatures such as these. The Wendigo is terrifying, though, because of its existential nature of threatening the very flesh of human beings. There's also accounts of the fact that it did persist across the land, and it's such a very powerful memory. And again, it goes back to questioning the whole fact that we have such a vast array and variety of creatures that are seen across the land. So, again, is this merely the product of old myth, old legend that's very regionalized and localized, and we don't see it everywhere? Or is there something that's truly authentic to the presence or the possible presence of these creatures that are very clearly non-human, or perhaps an even more disturbing possibility that these creatures were once human that were transformed into something that were no longer human by some process that we no longer understand? Indeed, when we look at many of the mythological accounts, the legend, whether we're talking about one of the cryptids, the Wendigo, or even the Plague Doctor, there seem to be accounts that do give a disturbing possibility of what these creatures could possibly afflict in terms of terror on a human population. And this is where we start to see the connections from our other previous explorations when we look at the fall of previous civilizations. We do seem to have it in our collective memory that there were creatures that were quite terrifying, creatures that had tremendous psychological, physical, and even spiritual capabilities to attack and destroy the very welfare, the very fabric of human civilizations in the past. Imagine a vast army or array of such creatures like this, different types of creatures in different areas that had these extended capabilities. Now, once again, I'm sure the adherents of the mainstream would dismiss such a notion as the product of pseudoscience or just simply a wild imagination. Although, I'm always interested in the fact that we also want to say that there were wondrous and fantastical creatures that did officially exist in the distant past. So why is it some creatures could exist and other creatures cannot? Well, you simply need to turn to someone in authority, someone who has been through the academic system, and they will give you an honest answer. And the last thing you should ever do is trust what you see with your own eyes, or certainly do not come to your own conclusions. But when we look at the mythological terrors that many of these creatures represent, and we see the fact that they endure within our fear in the back of our mind to this day, we can see that there is indeed a lingering and profound psychological effect behind them. And whatever the actual story behind these creatures, if they're simply truly the product of our minds, or do they represent something that did exist and did terrorize us in the past? We also have to ask the question in terms of how long ago this was in the past. It should be noted that the Native Americans do not speak of many of the terrifying elements of their mythology. And whether it's a skinwalker, a wendigo, or whatever, and there's certainly no shortage of different creatures that appear in Native American mythology that are quite threatening and terrifying, we do have to remember there does seem to be an element of realism to them, in the fact of the impact of the psychological terror that people do not speak of them. Are these creatures simply the product of our nightmares and we simply record them to terrorize others for entertainment purposes? Or is there something behind them that does reflect something that genuinely happened in the past? A memory, if you will, that's locked in our minds. Were these just UFOs or lights, or do they represent something else? We do have many accounts of strange anomalies that do not make a lot of sense, and oftentimes people will go to extreme levels to dismiss anything which is seen and reported. And it's quite fascinating. Yet the same accounts could be used or subverted for misinformation purposes. So we always have to remain cautious and keep open minds and actually come to our own conclusions. We see that there is definitely a theme to make the whole concept of exploring topics such as this ridiculous and absurd. And certain skeptoids and people will tell us that we shouldn't even be considering this. Yet when we go about the land, we do see very interesting remnants of what may have been in the past. We do see odd objects that defy simple explanation. And we do have accounts, even when we look at our official and certified historical account, that simply do not make a lot of sense. So what's the real explanation behind these others, these non-human beings? What were they, and where did they fall in our 5 eras possible timeline? Perhaps the plague doctors really were some sort of terrifying creature that was contrived or created in the distant past using some sort of dark alchemical processes. These were creatures that existed between the resets, and they were unleashed on the population to bring about control. And that's why we still have this mentality of death that accompanies the plague doctors. The cryptids could have been other creatures from even before in the past. A few surviving examples that are still dotted across the land. Of course, it could simply be the product of our imagination, and for some reason these legends endure and people are just simply into entertainment. So simply watch the news and don't question anything, and allow yourself to be told what to think and what's important every day. You certainly have that option. But the plague doctor is something that intrigues me because we're informed that this was a response to the plague at the time. Yet these were the same people who managed to construct the Florence Cathedral. And it should be noted that the Florence Cathedral in Florence, Italy was constructed prior to the Renaissance, and they didn't need an industrial revolution to do it. Of course, we can simply wave it off with our usual intellectual cheetah flips of explaining what happened in the past. But what do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for joining me.